My name is Alara Whitmore. And in my family, I was never the chosen one. I wasn't the daughter my mother bragged about at church. I wasn't the one my father introduced proudly at business dinners. I wasn't the sister relatives admired. I was the other one. The quiet one. The stubborn one. The disappointing one. Growing up in Connecticut, my parents built their lives around appearances. My father ran a regional real estate firm. My mother obsessed over charity galas and country club reputations. My older sister, Vanessa, fit perfectly into their world. Designer dresses, Ivy League education, a fiancé from an influential political family. And then there was me. I didn't care about social rankings. I didn't care about marrying for status. And that was my first crime. It started when I met him. His name was Adrian Cole. He worked part-time at a bookstore near my college. He wore simple clothes, drove an old sedan and lived in a modest apartment. He listened more than he spoke. He remembered small details about me, my favorite author, how I hated loud parties, how I preferred rain over sunshine. For the first time in my life, someone chose me without conditions. When I brought him home to meet my family, I should have known what would happen. The silence at dinner was suffocating. My father looked at Adrian's worn watch and slightly scuffed shoes before even shaking his hand. "So," my father said, cutting into his steak, "what exactly do you plan to provide for my daughter?" Adrian answered calmly, "I plan to build something meaningful. It may take time, but I'll never stop working." My mother gave a tight smile. "Meaningful doesn't pay for country club memberships." Vanessa smirked. "Does he at least come from something respectable?" I felt heat crawl up my neck. "He comes from himself," I said firmly. That was the first night my parents told me I was embarrassing them. When Adrian proposed a year later, with a modest ring he saved for months to buy, my mother cried. Not happy tears. "You are throwing your life away," she said. "You're choosing poverty. You'll come crawling back in 2 years." But I didn't. I married him anyway. And that's when the real humiliation began. At my wedding, my parents contributed the bare minimum. They made sure everyone knew it was mostly funded by the groom's side. They invited influential guests who whispered about the misalliance. My sister arrived in a dress brighter than mine. During the reception, I overheard my aunt say, "Such a shame. She could have married a senator's son." My father toasted Vanessa instead of me. To my eldest daughter, who continues to make this family proud. Adrian squeezed my hand under the table. "I am sorry," he whispered. He leaned close. "Never apologize for choosing love." After marriage, my family's treatment worsened. At Thanksgiving, they seated us at the far end of the table near the kitchen. At Christmas, they exchanged expensive gifts in front of us, then handed us a generic gift card. One year, when Adrian offered to help my father with some property data analysis, because Adrian was surprisingly skilled with numbers, my father laughed. "Stick to whatever small job you have, son." So, but never truly meaning it. They constantly asked when I would upgrade my life. When I got pregnant with our first child, I thought maybe things would soften. They didn't. My mother suggested we wait until finances were stable. Vanessa said, "Children are expensive. Hope you can afford diapers." When our daughter, Lily, was born, my parents visited once. My mother looked around our modest home and said, "It's small." But Adrian held Lily like she was the most precious thing in existence. And in that tiny living room, I felt richer than any mansion could ever make me feel. Still, their words lingered. Every family gathering became a battlefield. At a 4th of July party, my uncle loudly asked Adrian, "So when are you going to make real money?" Adrian smiled politely. "Sooner than you think." They thought it was delusion. I knew it was confidence. What none of them knew, what even I barely understood, was that Adrian's past was far more complicated than it appeared. He never talked about his father much. He said they were estranged. He said he wanted to build something on his own. He refused financial help from anyone. But sometimes late at night, I'd catch him staring at old documents, corporate reports, stock analysis files, things far too complex for someone just working part-time. When I asked, he'd kiss my forehead. "Trust me, timing is everything." Years passed. We struggled, yes. There were months when we budgeted carefully. Months when I took freelance design work while raising Lily. Months when we said no to vacations. But we never said no to each other. Meanwhile, Vanessa married into political power. Her wedding was featured in magazines. My mother framed the cover and placed it in the living room. My wedding photo? It was stored in a drawer. The final straw came at my grandmother's 80th birthday. It was a lavish event at a luxury hotel ballroom. Crystal chandeliers. Live orchestra. Champagne towers. We arrived modestly dressed but confident. Vanessa approached first. "Oh, you came," she said, fake surprise dripping from her voice. My mother scanned my dress. "Is that from last year?" Adrian remained calm. During dinner, seating cards were arranged strategically. Vanessa and her husband sat at the main family table. We were placed near distant cousins. When my father stood to give a speech, he praised Vanessa's husband for his influence and strategic partnerships. Then he added, without looking at us, "Some of us understand the importance of aligning with strength." The implication was clear. My husband was weakness. That night in the parking lot, I broke down. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I'm tired of being less in their eyes." Adrian held my face gently. "You're not less. They just measure worth incorrectly. And one day, he said quietly, they'll understand exactly who they underestimated." I didn't know then how literal that promise would become, because 3 months later everything changed. Adrian got a phone call at 3:17 a.m. He stared at the screen for a long time before answering. His voice was calm. "Yes, I understand." He hung up and looked at me. "My father passed away." I froze. "You said you barely speak to him." "I didn't. But that doesn't change what's about to happen." "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly. "Alara, my father wasn't just distant. He was the CEO of Coal International Holdings." I blinked. The name hit me like thunder. Coal International was a multi-billion-dollar global investment empire. The kind of company my father read about in financial magazines. The kind of empire my sister's husband tried networking into for years. "You're joking," I whispered. "I left at 21, Adrian said. He wanted me molded into his image. I wanted to build my own identity. So I walked away. And now, he left everything to me." Silence swallowed the room. I felt dizzy. All of it. Controlling shares. Executive authority. Private assets. My husband, the man they called poor, had just become one of the youngest billionaires in the country. He reached for my hand. "I didn't tell you because I needed to prove to myself I wasn't just his shadow." Tears filled my eyes. "You chose me knowing you could have had that life any time? I chose you because you saw me before the empire." And in that moment, I understood something powerful. The insults. The humiliation. The years of being underestimated. They were about to mean something. But Adrian wasn't smiling. He was calculating. "They hurt you for years," he said quietly. "They measured you by money." His jaw tightened slightly, the first time I'd ever seen controlled anger in him. "I think it's time they learn what real power looks like." And that was only the beginning. And honestly, that hurt worse. After the engagement dinner disaster, my parents didn't scream anymore. They did something worse. They smiled. That polite, tight, fake smile people use when they're embarrassed of you. My mother started introducing Daniel as, "This is the young man she chose." Not future son-in-law. Not Daniel. Just the young man she chose. Like I had picked up a stray from the street. My father refused to shake his hand after that night. Said it was nothing personal. It was always personal. The first family event. 3 months before the wedding, we had my cousin Alicia's engagement party. Big venue. Country club. Crystal lights. Luxury cars outside. Daniel showed up in his usual simple navy suit. Tailored. Clean. Elegant. But no flashy watch. No designer logo. No lauve bealt. To my family, that meant one thing. Poor. My uncle leaned toward my dad and said loudly enough for Daniel to hear, "Hope he didn't rent that suit." My mother laughed. I froze. Daniel smiled like he didn't hear it. But I felt his hand tighten around mine. The seating arrangement. They sat us near the back, near the kitchen doors. Every important guest was in the center. Every wealthy connection at the front. We were at table 17, next to the emergency exit. My sister, who was 2 years younger than me but treated like royalty, walked past and whispered, "You could have done better." Daniel heard that one. And still, he smiled. That calm, unbothered smile. Sometimes I hated how calm he was. I wanted him to fight back, to say something, to defend himself. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned closer to me and whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't. Halfway through the night, my father stood up to give a toast. And somehow, he made it about me. "Alicia made a smart choice," he said, raising his glass. "She chose stability, security, a future." Then he looked directly at me. "Love is important, but maturity is more important." People laughed awkwardly. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me. Daniel didn't flinch. He just sipped his water. Later that night, I found my mom cornering him near the bar. I heard her before I saw them. "You don't want to hold her back, do you?" she asked sweetly. "Mom." Daniel replied calmly. "She had options. Real options. Doctors. Lawyers. Investors. What exactly?" There it was. The question they always asked. He smiled politely. "I work in asset management." My mom blinked. "So stocks?" "In a way." She looked unimpressed. "Is it stable?" "It is." She leaned closer. "Let me give you advice. If you really love her, don't drag her down with you." That's when I stepped in. "That's enough." But Daniel gently touched my arm. "It's okay." No, it wasn't okay. My parents tried to control everything. The venue, the guest list, the decor. And every time we picked something modest, they'd say, "Of course, that's all you can afford." Daniel never corrected them, even when my father offered to help financially, adding, "Not everyone starts at the same level." Daniel declined politely. "We're comfortable," he said. Comfortable. That word became a joke in my family. "Oh, they're comfortable. So comfortable. Must be nice to be comfortable." Like it was code for struggling. Our wedding wasn't small, but it wasn't flashy either. It was elegant, understated, warm, and my family showed up dressed like they were attending a royal gala, trying to outshine us. My sister whispered before the ceremony, "This is cute, very budget-friendly." I smiled her. Because deep down, I didn't care. I wasn't marrying for status. I was marrying the only person who never made me feel small. The worst moment didn't happen at the wedding. It happened 6 months later. At Thanksgiving, my parents hosted dinner at their house. Huge dining table, 20 guests, business associates. Daniel and I arrived on time. My father looked at him and said, "Oh good, you made it. Traffic from the apartment complex bad." Apartment complex. We owned a house. He just assumed. Daniel smiled again. No traffic. Dinner started. And then my uncle asked the question. "So Daniel, when are you planning to upgrade careers?" The table went silent. Daniel put down his fork. "I'm exactly where I need to be." My cousin laughed. "That's what people say before they pivot." I looked at my husband. Waiting for him to finally snap. Instead, he turned to me and asked softly, "Do you want more turkey?" I wanted to cry. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough not to react. 3 months after Thanksgiving, everything shifted. Daniel got a call at 2:17 a.m. I remember the time because I woke up when his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, and his face changed. Not panic, not fear, just stillness. "I need to take this," he said. He stepped outside. 20 minutes later, he came back in and sat on the edge of the bed. My father passed away. I froze. I knew Daniel's father was wealthy, but they were estranged. His father had built a massive business empire, real estate, energy investments, private equity, but Daniel had walked away years ago. He didn't want to be the heir. He wanted his own life, his own identity, and now, That empire had no one else. You don't have to go back, I told him. He looked at me for a long moment. I'm not going back for him, he said quietly. I'm going back for us. The funeral was private. Closed press. High security. And that's when I understood. The asset management job was one of his father's smaller firms. The modest salary? Optional. Daniel wasn't just wealthy. He was the sole successor to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. And no one in my family knew. Not yet. When the legal documents were finalized, everything transferred. Companies, stocks, properties, board control. Overnight, the man they called unstable became one of the youngest CEOs in the state. And he didn't change. Not even slightly. He still wore simple suits. Still drove the same car. Still ate cereal at midnight. But something in his eyes shifted. A quiet resolve. 2 weeks later, my father called me. Not to check on Daniel. Not to offer condolences. But to ask, does he still work at that little firm? I hesitated. Yes. It wasn't a lie. Technically. My father sighed. You know, the Thompson contract fell through. Thompson Industries was huge. Losing that deal cost my father millions. Shame, I said. Does Daniel know anyone who could help? There it was. The first shift. Suddenly, Daniel was useful. I told him about the call. He listened quietly, then asked, what do you want? Not what should we do? Not what's strategic. What do you want? And for the first time in my life, I didn't want approval. I wanted justice. A year after the first humiliating one, we were invited again. But this time, we arrived in a black car with a driver. Not to show off, but because Daniel had back-to-back board meetings. When we walked in, my father noticed the car. He noticed the watch Daniel now wore. Subtle. Swiss. 7 figures. My mother suddenly hugged him. Longer than usual. We heard about your promotion. Promotion. That's what they called it. Daniel smiled. It's been busy. Dinner started. And for the first time, the questions changed. So Daniel, how's the market? What's your take on energy? Any advice for young investors? Same table. Different tone. My sister leaned toward me and whispered, why didn't you tell us? I smiled. You never asked. But they still didn't understand something. We weren't there for reconciliation. We were there because Daniel had a plan. And I didn't even know the full extent of it yet. All I knew was that the man they laughed at was done being silent. And this time, when he moved, it wouldn't be subtle. People think revenge is loud. It's not. Real revenge is quiet, strategic, patient. And when it finally lands, it doesn't scream. It shifts the ground beneath your feet. After that second Thanksgiving, the one where everyone suddenly respected Daniel, something changed in my family. They stopped laughing. They started calculating. My father called twice that week. My mother texted me just checking in. My sister suddenly wanted coffee dates. But the energy wasn't warmth. It was hunger. They sensed power. And they wanted access to it. 2 months later, the truth surfaced. My father's company was in trouble. Not small trouble. Serious trouble. A zoning approval for a major commercial development had been denied. Investors were backing out. A regulatory investigation had started sniffing around one of their financing structures. The Thompson contract they lost last year? That had been their lifeline. Without it, they were exposed. And they needed influence. Political influence. Financial backing. A public endorsement from someone untouchable. They needed Daniel. My parents invited us to dinner. Not Thanksgiving. Not a holiday. Just dinner. Private. Intimate. When we arrived, the house felt different. My father opened the door himself. That had never happened before. He shook Daniel's hand. Firmly. With respect. We sat in the formal dining room. The one usually reserved for important guests. Daniel closed the folder slowly. Then he asked something no one expected. Before we discuss numbers, may I ask something? My father forced a smile. Of course. Daniel looked at him steadily. When you said at Thanksgiving last year that I should upgrade careers, did you mean that? Silence. My uncle shifted in his seat. My mother stared at her plate. That was a joke, my father said quickly. Daniel nodded. And when you suggested I might hold your daughter back? Another silence. My father cleared his throat. We didn't know you then. Daniel leaned back slightly. That's true. His voice wasn't angry. It was controlled. But you judged me anyway. No one spoke. And for the first time, the power dynamic was undeniable. Then Daniel did something unexpected. He turned to me. What do you think? My entire family looked at me, waiting, hoping, calculating. For years, I had been the invisible daughter, the emotional punching bag, the disappointment. Now they needed my voice. I took a breath. I think partnerships are built on respect, I said calmly. And respect wasn't something you gave freely. My sister whispered, we were just looking out for you. I looked at her. No, you were looking down on me. No one denied it. Because they couldn't. Daniel reopened the folder. I'm willing to help, he said. Relief flooded the room instantly. My father exhaled loudly. But, Daniel continued, not as a silent backer. The relief froze. My company would take controlling interest in the project. Majority equity, full transparency, and restructuring authority. Translation. He wouldn't save them. He would own them. My father's face tightened. That's aggressive. Daniel met his eyes evenly. So was the way you treated your daughter. The room went still. But that wasn't the revenge. That was just the surface. The real move had already been set in motion. 3 weeks before that dinner, Daniel's legal team had quietly acquired a significant percentage of shares in my father's company through public market purchases and private investors looking to exit. They hadn't noticed. They were too busy scrambling. By the time the regulatory investigation intensified, Daniel's firm had already positioned itself as a stability partner to calm markets. Which meant, if my father refused the partnership, Daniel could still influence the board, still steer decisions, still determine outcomes. Without asking. 2 months later, the regulatory findings were released. Nothing criminal, but severe enough to shake investor confidence. Stock prices fell. Banks tightened credit lines. And the board demanded experienced oversight. Guess who they nominated? Daniel. My father didn't have the votes to stop it. The board meeting lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Daniel walked out as executive chairman. My father retained a title, but not control. The media framed it as a strategic evolution, a visionary merger, a new era of leadership, stability through strength. My mother called me crying, not from sadness, from humiliation. People are saying Daniel saved us. I didn't respond, because he didn't save them. He positioned himself so they couldn't ignore him again. One evening, after everything finalized, I asked him, was this always the plan? He looked at me carefully. No. Then when did it become the plan? He paused. Thanksgiving. That comment. That table. That laughter. He never forgot it. Not out of ego, but because he saw what it did to me. I didn't need revenge, he said softly. But you deserved dignity. That broke me, because all I had ever wanted was dignity. One evening, after everything finalized, I asked him, was this always the plan? He looked at me carefully. No. Then when did it become the plan? He paused. Thanksgiving. That comment. That table. That laughter. He never forgot it. Not out of ego, but because he saw what it did to me. I didn't need revenge, he said softly. But you deserved dignity. That broke me, because all I had ever wanted was dignity. 6 months later, my parents hosted another family event. But this time, the invitations carried both my father's name and Daniel's. Guests treated him like the central figure. My father deferred to him publicly, asked for his opinion, praised his leadership. And for the first time in my life, no one looked at me with pity. They looked at me with something else. Respect. My sister pulled me aside. You won, she said quietly. I shook my head. This was never a competition. She looked confused. Maybe it always had been for her. Later that night, when the party was winding down, Daniel handed me a small envelope. What's this? Your gift. Inside was a document. Property deed. My name. Only mine. A foundation. Funded entirely by him. Dedicated to supporting young women who were financially pressured to marry for status. My throat tightened. You remembered? Of course I did, he said. Years ago, I had once told him how trapped I felt. How girls and families like mine were treated like strategic assets. Now, we were building something that dismantled that system. That was the revenge. Not destruction. Correction. A week later, my father asked to meet alone. No lawyers. No business. Just coffee. He looked older. Smaller. I was wrong, he said quietly. Not defensive. Not strategic. Just honest. I thought success looked one way. I thought protection meant control. I listened. For years, he continued. I thought you made a mistake. He swallowed. You didn't. It wasn't dramatic. No tears. But it mattered. Because for the first time, he saw me. Not as an extension. Not as leverage. But as a person. Do I hate them? No. Do I forget? Also no. Revenge isn't always about burning bridges. Sometimes it's about building something so powerful that the people who underestimated you have to walk across it. Carefully. Respectfully. They thought I married down. They thought I chose emotion over strategy. They thought love was weakness. But what they never understood is this. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg for validation. It doesn't compete in rooms where it isn't respected. It waits. It builds. And when the moment comes, it doesn't destroy. It repositions. Daniel didn't take revenge for ego. He did it because he watched me shrink at that table. He saw the way their words landed. And he decided, no one would ever make me feel small again. Not because we had money, but because we had leverage. And dignity. Last Thanksgiving we hosted. At our home.